Hi friends, and welcome to another video. Today I am talking about all the books that I read in February, and oh my goodness, did I find some incredible ones. I'm really excited about this month. It was just so good for so many reasons, and yeah, let's just get into all the books. So first things first, let's go over some stats. So I read 6 books in the month of February, and 7 technically if you count the audiobook that I listed from a TikTok series that I watched. Sorry, not sorry. But I read 6 real books in the month of February. 4 of those were print and 2 of those were ebooks. And I also read over 2,000 pages in the month of February, which was 1,000 more than the month of January. So your girl was reading. She might have been reading a little sporadically, but she was definitely reading. I definitely want to get a little bit better with reading consistently. I find myself either not reading at all or reading everything at once. As you can see by my pages graph, I am pretty much all over the place, and I don't really know how to fix that, truthfully. That's kind of just the ADHD in me. I'm either not hyperfixated on books or I am, and so I don't know, I'm trying to figure it out. But the month of March, hopefully, I will get better at reading consistently. Now, every single book that I read was a fantasy book, but those fantasy books definitely had different moods. Of course, most of them were very adventurous, but I had some darker fantasy books, and there were some lighter fantasy books that were more humorous, kind of just a wide spectrum of different moods when it comes to the books. And I just love that Storygraph does that. Can I say that is such a great addition, because like not all fantasy books are going to be the same vibe, right? Or like not all romance books are the same vibe. So really happy about that. But those are all my stats, so let's just get into the books. The first book that I read was The Tainted Cup. Now, The Tainted Cup is, of course, a fantasy book. It was also an ARC that I received, but it is already out, so you can purchase this. And it is a Sherlock-esque fantasy book that's kind of a mix between Pacific Rim, Attack on Titan, and like Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. I know those do not seem like they go together at all, but I promise you they do. They fit just so nicely in the world of The Tainted Cup. Now, the premise of this book is you are following the main character, Din, and he is the assistant to the head investigator of this fantasy world. There is a murder that took place, and then eventually it is found out that there are several connected murders happening, and a whole load of mysteries come from the history that the government is hiding along with all of these murders and the people that are affected by it, and it just gets a little intense and a little crazy. I have to say I absolutely love that this book is from the point of view of the Watson character, because it just makes it so much better in my opinion. I really loved having Anne, the Sherlock-esque character, be this person that no one can figure out, and yet she is so smart and wickedly talented just because she is, which is amazing. The actual fantasy of this world is really fascinating too. This has excellent world building, and it's one of those books that the world building doesn't feel overbearing. It doesn't take away. I was a little nervous because this is first a mystery book before it is a fantasy book. I was nervous that the fantasy elements were going to take away from the mystery, but they only added to it, which was absolutely amazing. All in all, I really enjoyed my time with The Tainted Cup, and I can't wait for the rest of the series to come out. But I really did enjoy that this book could be a standalone, because I do get very overwhelmed when I'm entering a big fantasy series. I'm like, I don't know how much these books are going to take up. I don't know how long the series is going to be, and that can be extremely overwhelming. But The Tainted Cup had a very concise ending, which was really nice, especially with the mystery going. I wanted the mystery to be a full thing, and it did reach its conclusion at the end, which I really appreciated. But I cannot wait to see more adventures from these two, because they just were incredible. Their dynamic was top tier, and we need more Sherlock-esque fantasy, I think. I think I was missing out in my life. Either way, I highly recommend reading this book, and you're just gonna have a fun time with it. Now, the next book that I read ended up being my favorite book on this entire list. So if you have to choose one book on this list to read Legendborn. Oh my goodness, read Legendborn. I raved about this book so much in my reading vlog. I was just absolutely blown away. This book, of course, is from the library, but I am buying a copy. It will arrive soon, and as soon as it arrives, it is going immediately on my favorite shelf. Immediately. This is one of my favorite fantasy books that I've ever read. The world is perfect. The magic system adds to Bree's character. The characters are incredible. The found family is so heartwarming. The depiction of grief is so accurate and visceral and moving. It made me cry quite a bit. Again, world and magic and intense moments. Every single piece of this book, perfect. Absolutely perfect. Also, I'm a lover of books set in the Carolinas. I always will be. And this book depicts the Carolinas more perfectly than I've ever read in my entire life. It's insane. But the plot, let's get into the plot. So this book follows Bree following her mother's death as she is going to UNC for an early college class vibe. She's still technically in high school, but you know, they do like early classes for some students. That's kind of what she's doing there at UNC. She ends up going to the campus and starts seeing very clear magical creatures and demons and students fighting those magical creatures and demons. She clearly feels like she's not supposed to see these things, but she keeps seeing them and she's going to figure out what they are. And so she uncovers a secret society that is within UNC, and a lot of things happen from there that are kind of getting into spoiler territory, but the major thing here is that Bree's story is absolutely legendary. It is about becoming a legend and everything that that entails, and I just adore this book in so many ways. It's just perfect. And also, I just wanted to add one quick thing before we move on to the next book. The way the magic system adds to Bree's story is absolutely insane to me. I still can't get over it because it's a perfect mirror to what Bree is currently feeling, and the way you uncover things about the magic fit with how Bree is feeling, and that is just so cool. Oh my goodness, this book was just amazing, top tier, everything I wanted. Wonderful. The next book that I read was a buddy read with my friend Jules, and it was such a good time. I absolutely loved being able to freak out about this book together and just freak out about all the crazy moments that happen in this fantasy book. But that book is Raybearer. This book has one of the most incredible fantasy worlds I think I've ever read in my life. It is extremely unique, but so well built out. It has all these different geopolitical alliances that are just intertangled and weaved together, and all of these different parties have very different ideas of how the world should work, and creating that and not making it feel overwhelming is very talented and requires so much skill, and this book just nails it. I adored the found family in this book. It really was a showcase of how important and beautiful platonic love is, and it was just really wonderful to explore that. There is fantastic ace representation, which we love, and also it has one of the cutest romantic subplots I have read in a fantasy book ever. Like, if you are wanting to get into fantasy and you've only read romance books, but you don't want to do romantasy, this is the book for you. It's an excellent entry into what most fantasy is like without feeling super overwhelming and still having a really incredible romance that cannot be topped. Let me tell you, this romance is so good. Now, in this book, we are following a young girl and woman named Tar. She has been commanded by her mother, the lady, to kill the crowned prince. Now, Tar's been raised in isolation for the majority of her life, so she doesn't know what the crowned prince is or what he looks like, but she ends up being sent to join the Prince's Council of 11, and she ends up doing that. And so this whole book is about her trying to kind of get out of this forced story that her mother forced on her. And it's such a wonderful story about self-determination, choosing your own way, choosing your own path, and fighting against all odds to do that. And also just a little sprinkling of reworking an entire system and government on the side. So every single moment of this book was absolutely wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really think the relationships are where this book hits hard. The relationships between people are just absolutely fantastic. That being said, there are a little bit of pacing things that I had an issue with. There was a few moments where I felt the intensity just like went away and it felt like nothing was happening, but that was very, very few and far between and was very quickly remedied within like a next chapter. So it's a little bit of a stickler of me to really say that this was a pacing thing, but I have to say that because that's how I felt. But either way, Raver is incredible. I absolutely loved it. And also, this is the most beautiful cover I have ever seen on a book ever. Just how gorgeous is that? Like, oh my word. The next book that I read is my least favorite of all of these books. I don't recommend reading this, and unfortunately it was an ARC, and it was my most anticipated read of the year, which was just extremely unfortunate. The book comes out sometime in April, but I just would not recommend reading it. It ended up, for me, feeling like a colonizer romance, and I just don't really support that. And honestly, there was a lot of other issues with this book, but that book was To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods. Now, I have a full written review of this book, and I also have shared my very sad disappointment in the reading blog that I read this book in, so I'm not going to go too much more in depth here other than, one, there's a colonizer romance that ends up being very, very abusive, and this book was marketed as an enemies to lover YA book, which is why I just found it really weird and wrong. This book really felt like a dark romance written for teenagers, and that's just not my cup of tea. And yeah, that being said, I am excited to see where the series continues, because where this book ended holds a lot of promise, and it makes me feel like there is hope for this series. And the author did show a lot of promise. There were some chapters that really blew me away, and it made me feel like the publishing company kind of forced a romance that didn't need to be in a really cool fantasy world, which was just really unfortunate. So I hope that this next book in the series, she just writes what she wants, she writes the story that she wants, and I hope the colonizer romance is left far, far behind. But it did take me a really long time to get through this book, and it was a little bit of a struggle for me, so yeah, just a bit of a disappointment, but you know, 1 out of 6 is a pretty good deal. The next book that I read is definitely a new favorite of mine, and that is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. I have never read a fantasy book that has made me laugh out loud more than this one. This nails the comedy factor of fantasy. I have yet to find a fantasy book that really captures, you know, just like the funny, humorous moments that fantasy sometimes has, especially if you think about like a D&D table or a just like fantasy adult series like Vox Machina, for example. There are funny moments because fantasy can be funny sometimes, and this again just captures that perfectly. It has a lot of spice, which I really enjoyed. I really, really loved the romance between Cinnamon and Fallon in this, and we'll get into the plot in a minute. I absolutely adored that this was a step above cozy fantasy. It felt so cozy throughout, but there were stakes and there were higher, intense moments and plot points that gave a little bit more oomph than your normal cozy fantasy, and I'm all for cozy fantasy. I'm just working in a shop, I'm just doing my daily things. I'm living my life. I love those books, but sometimes it's nice to have the cozy vibes and still have the intense moments. And this just nailed that. It was wonderful and perfect all the way throughout. And as a romantasy, this is exactly what I want. Now, the book itself follows a woman named Cinnamon as she gets absolutely wasted at a party that is a send-off for an adventuring party that is going off to slay demons that have been attacking the realm. So she gets wasted, she ends up leaving for the night and finds a collapsed building, and in that collapsed building, a man is trapped inside. And so she goes and helps him and then finds out that he's a demon. He's one of the demons that adventuring party had actually been set out to kill. So we're kind of in a weird, intense moment here. Now that demon's name ends up being Fallon, and Fallon and Cinnamon end up going on an adventure together to save her people and his people all in one fell swoop. They meet a lot of incredible characters along the way. There definitely is a found family vibe to this, because there had to be. I mean, this is fantasy. We have to have found family here. And the romance, of course, is just top tier, and every single part of this book was great. I love the quips, I love the humor, I love the intensity, I love the coziness. Speaking of coziness, there is one scene where Cinnamon is cooking crawfish for Fallon, and the food descriptions in this book, I have never wanted to eat something more in my entire life. Like, y'all. This book is absolutely fantastic. It's a little short one, which is great, and I feel like this is a perfect book to use kind of as like a palate cleanser between high fantasy books if you still want to be in a fantasy world, which is great because I need those so much. I also love that this book is similar to The Tainted Cup, where it definitely feels like a single novel, but there is an entire series. So I'm super, super excited to continue reading books and continue reading about this world and about the characters in it. But I definitely think each story is self-contained, which is really, really nice. And again, makes me feel so much better about getting into a series because y'all know I get a little nervous about it. Now, the last book that I read for February was The Blood Trials. This is a sci-fi fantasy book, and I literally just finished this last night. It was so, so good. I am definitely still trying to get all of my thoughts out and settled, but I absolutely adored this. First, I loved this because this was definitely written for an adult audience in mind, and I have not read a lot of fantasy and especially sci-fi books that really had an adult audience in mind and a young adult audience in mind. It kind of fits that perfect in between like the really intense high fantasy that anyone could read, including your dad, or the YA books that, you know, can't really discuss certain topics. This just fills that void, and I'm just so, so happy about it. The book also has a wonderful found family, because of course we love that, but it also has a lot more with governments and the world and trying to tear down a system and what it takes to tear down a system and rebuild it, which I just love that discussion and that introduction, and you can really, really explore that in sci-fi in a way that you can't all the time in fantasy. This just really nailed it for me. And also it has a wonderful mystery aspect that just like keeps you intrigued the entire book, and it was a great time. Now this book follows Kenna following the death of her grandfather, and her grandfather ended up being a major leader, if not kind of like the president of this sci-fi world. He ends up passing away, and she finds out that her grandfather might not have passed away from natural causes. So she kind of goes on a bit of a revenge mystery searching run throughout this book, which we love. We love a good revenge story. It's so good. Now, to find the people that killed her grandfather, she has to join a high military class in this world, and to join that high military class, she has to go through a series of trials. Yes, this has the military school fantasy academy. We love it. We love a good, intense school fantasy world. It's so good, and I don't know why it hits every single time, but it does. And this one was done absolutely perfectly. The world felt extremely built out, and the school just added the right amount of flavor to the world that was already there. I have a really hard time because a lot of school fantasy books end up just flushing out the school, and the world beyond feels very lackluster. This does not have that problem. It's very clear that the world can stand on its own, and so I'm very, very excited to see the future of this series. But either way, Kenna joins this school along with her two friends, and she has to battle it out between other students to gain the military class and clearance that she needs. And she does this all while trying to figure out what happened to her grandfather, and man, does it get crazy and it gets so intense. I really adored this book. I thought it was great. It's a big one. It's about 450 pages, so you're gonna be reading it for a minute, but I just really love a world that feels very real. It feels like it is thought out enough where you could just like jump into it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts when it comes to what the world is and how the world is going to interact with you and with each other, and it's wonderful. Yeah, this book was incredible at all of the things that it explored, and again, kind of like I was saying earlier, sci-fi is just an excellent genre to explore societal problems, and this one just nails it in so many ways. All right, so those are all the books that I read in the month of February. I have so many books that I did not get to in the month of February purely because I was either busy or these books just took me a minute to read. But I'm very, very excited. The fantasy grind is going to continue going. I have some more fantasy books in March, and just in general, so many books that I'm very, very excited about. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.